years ago when taxis were horse-drawn carriages, the poor old taxi driver, cab driver, he'd be outside on his horse and carriage in all sorts of weathers while the passengers are in a little carriage on the inside. So you can imagine, the environment for working in was not great. And the cab drivers, when they were horse-drawn carriages, would have taken shelter maybe in the pubs, which is not really good if you're driving a horse and carriage around London. You don't really want your taxi drivers being drunk. And so a charity was set up to have these what are called cabman shelters. So you can see there's that little window, you can get a cup of tea, bacon sandwich, slice of cake, and there's a little bar on the right hand side here, just below those posters, that little bar there, that was historically where the cabmen used to tether their horses. But of course, there's all these motorised vehicles now. But there is a little few tables inside there. Anyone can go and get a cup of tea from that little window there, but you can only. I just want to somehow turn around here. Let's do it here. But if you're only taxi drivers can sit inside the shelter there. So to be a taxi driver in London, to drive one of these official-looking cabs, you have to do what is called the knowledge. The knowledge is slightly misleading in its name. Knowledge would imply they, like me, know the history of London. They might well know the history of London, but the knowledge is like having a map of London in your head. Within a 6-mile radius of a place called Trafalgar Square, which we'll drive past later, within a 6-mile radius, you need to know basically all the roads, where you can turn left, where you can't turn left. You need to know all the main stores, hotels, theatres, and the only way you're really going to learn it is by getting on a bike and driving around, one area at a time, trying to study the area. So you will often see guys and girls on motorcycles with a clipboard, and they're very likely to be doing the knowledge. And on average, it takes about 4 years to do it.
Whoa.
Yeah, on average. My brother took 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks to do
Whoa.
this.
But even today, when there's so many navigation systems, you need to do this?
Yes. So what happens is you get on your bike, you study for, several months, and then you do the testing is what is called an appearance. Over a period of time, you appear before the examiner, and the examiner, it's only an oral test, a verbal test of about 15-20 minutes, where the examiner will say, okay, Glenn, you've been doing the knowledge for 6 months now, let's see what you know. Imagine you've picked me up from the Ritz Hotel and I want to go to Abbey Road Studios. You tell me what the route is, and you describe the route, saying I turn left out of the Ritz Hotel along Piccadilly, then I turn right at Hyde Park corner, up Park Lane, and you basically describe the names you tell them the names of the roads, where you drop off, etc. And then if you pass that, they say, very good, come back in 8 weeks' time. You continue to study. In 8 weeks' time, you go back for another similar test, but it'll be slightly more difficult. And then if you pass that, you come back in 7 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time, 5 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, until you'll be coming in every week. And then they say it'll be something a little bit more difficult. It'll be something like, take me from the Marquis of Granby WC2 to, the Romanian embassy. Now, why I say the Marquis of Granby WC2, Marquis of Granby, fairly common name of a pub. WC2, if you remember, I said like the postal code, you'll see it on the street sign. So I will know that the Marquis of Granby WC2, which is no longer there anymore, but it's the Marquis of Granby in, I think it's Cambridge Circus, as opposed to the Marquis in Granby in SE13, which is in Lewisham. So you need to know it. And then you get your green badge, and then you drive one of these taxis. We do have electric taxis now. They are, of course, it's owned by China, the company now, but they're assembled in a place called Coventry in London. North of London, about 120 miles north of London is where I think they're assembled now. But yeah. But of course, the other alternative is taking an Uber. The Central London Mosque is on my left-hand side, and so particularly in this area, big North African, Lebanese community after the Second World War moved into this area, and the Central London Mosque, built in the 1960s by a man called Hibbard, Frank Hibbard is your main mosque in this area, and this leads us into Regent's Park. So another one of the parks is Regent's Park. What is a regent? Well, Regent's Park, Regent Street in London were all developed in the early 19th century, the Regency period. What am I talking about? Well, the monarch at the time, 1760 to 1820, the monarch was King George III. But the last 10 years of his reign, 1810 to 1820, he was mad. He had, we think, porphyria. Porphyria, blood disorder, can affect your mental health state. Anyway, he was too sick to really do anything. So his son acted as a regent. So a regent's like a deputy king, if you like. His son, so 1810 to 1820, King George III is still alive. His son, who eventually becomes George IV, on the passing of his father, George III, we talk about the Regency period, early 19th century. So this was all developed in the early 1800s. Regent's Park, they've got these beautiful little villas, parkside villas, mostly developed by George IV's favourite architect, a man called Nash. And in Regent's Park, also there's a boating lake here. There is also the Zoological Society of London here, or London Zoo, which was established in the early 19th century. And Sir Stamford Raffles, as in the founder, if that's the right word, of Singapore, the trading port of Singapore, it was instrumental in setting up the Zoological Society of London. Don't bother with London Zoo, by the way, folks. London Zoo so bad now, there's only one animal left, and it's a dog. It's a Shih Tzu. You will have lots of terrible jokes on a tour with me.
Dog.
There you go. So that's Regent's Park. And then we're just about to drive down a street called Baker Street. Baker Street, famous for... Anyone know what Baker Street's famous for? Baker Street's famous for Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective created by a man called Arthur Conan Doyle. Like pretty much any writer in the world today, they base their characters on people they know and places they know. So Arthur Conan Doyle creates this character apparently based on, I think, a lecture at Edinburgh University where Conan Doyle studied. And Sherlock Holmes appears in Study in Scarlet. Was that the first book? Or Sign of Four? One of the two is the first book, which appears in, well, not book, but a first story appears in Mrs. Beeton's Annual in the 1880s. And the first stories are John Watson basically narrating the stories. And John Watson meets Sherlock Holmes at St Bartholomew's Hospital, and then they lodge at 221B Baker Street at Mrs. Hudson's house. And on my right-hand side is... sorry, I just overshot where I wanted to be. I'm not really supposed to stop here, but there's a little museum. You can see a police officer in... can I take that?
Yes, please.
You can see the police officer outside the Sherlock Holmes Museum. There's a little blue plaque that says 221B, but the present 221B is actually the white building converted to apartments ahead of us. But when Conan Doyle was writing the Sherlock Holmes stories, apparently, if I'm correct, the numbering of the street didn't actually go up to 221B at the time of the Sherlock Holmes stories. But anyway, Monday, Baker Street is extended since Conan Doyle wrote the first stories, so the present 221 is on my right-hand side. But a small little Sherlock Holmes museum there. The other thing that Baker Street's famous for is a song by a man called Jerry Rafferty called Baker Street, simple as that. So it's Baker Street tube stations on my left-hand side. Sorry, underground tube station, sorry. Got a bit wrong there. There is a plaque on the wall here. H.G. Wells lived in an apartment block here. Science fiction writer, wrote, among other things, Time Machine, War of the Worlds. He lived here.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult to see, but as we get through this junction, on my left-hand side at 9 o'clock to us is a statue to Sherlock Holmes. And also you'll see a domed building, which is Madame Tussauds. Madame Tussauds' famous waxworks. French lady, come to live in London, late was it late 18th or early 19th century, and had these wax figures of mostly French monarchs. Not on this location at first, but eventually moved to this location. Hugely popular, well, worldwide now, is Madame Tussauds. Personally, I'm not interested in that sort of thing, but if that sort of thing floats your boat, then get tickets online to avoid the queues. So you'll catch a glimpse of the Sherlock Holmes statue, and then the Green Dome building is part of Madame Tussauds. They used to have the planetarium where the Green Dome building is. The planetarium has moved elsewhere, but still part of Madame Tussauds.
I was one time when I was to Madame Tussauds inside. It was included in the ticket also, the planetarium. Very, very nice.
Yeah, that was some time ago now. Sorry to keep going on about the Beatles, but another Beatles connection is on my left-hand side, just past the Everyman Cinema on the corner. There is a shop called Marsh and Parsons. There's a little plaque on the wall that tells us that this was the Apple Boutique. So when Brian Epstein died in August 1967, the Beatles, to quote Ringo Starr, were running around like headless chickens because Brian Epstein was their manager and they didn't know what to do. Brian Epstein's brother Clive took over the business side of things for a little while and basically said, you've got all this money, if you don't spend it, the tax man's going to have it. So they set up the Apple Corporation, which included a number of businesses, including the Apple Boutique, which was where Marsh and Parsons is on my left-hand side. And they got a group of designers collectively called The Fool, including Simon and Marique, and they designed all these sort of psychedelic clothes and things. But the Apple Boutique was just one of many companies, including the film company and Apple Records. The most common thread throughout all these companies was that money hemorrhaged out of the Beatles' bank accounts. They didn't really know what they were doing, and the boutique was a case in point. They opened it. It only lasted about 9 months, the whole operation, and in the end they closed down the shop, gave away all the stock. And before they closed down the shop, the Beatles turned up the day before to see what they wanted. Paul got, and I quote, a smashing overcoat, and poor old Ringo, nothing fitted him. So let's go and see a few famous sites. Where are we? 20 miles an hour on here. There's lots of squares in London. This is a typical square coming into a typical square. London, as I say, was essentially the walled city, and then the walls start to come down around about the 17th century. Then all these nice new neighbourhoods were being developed, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, with a square. So the whole idea of the square was you have a garden in the middle of the square, surrounded by other residential houses, and the residents had exclusive use of the garden. Some of the squares in this part of London, the buildings are no longer, there might be one or two residences, but some have been converted to offices, among other things. And then the gardens open to the public, but go a little further to the west, like Kensington, a lot of the squares still have the gardens for the exclusive use of the residents. They are known as key gardens because you need a key to get into them. We're just crossing Oxford Street, which is famous for shopping. Famous stores along here include Selfridges, immediately on my left-hand side. And as I say, I personally don't do shopping, but it's just one big shopping street. It's only 10:30.
My favorite shop in London, Selfridges,
Yeah, it started by an American called, forgot his first name, Mr. Selfridge. Of course, made into a TV show a few years ago. I wanted to drive through Grosvenor Square, but it looks like that's all shut off.
They do some maintenance.
That's no good. That's no good. And again, Beatles again. Sorry about this, boys and girls, but I do specialise in rock and roll tours and Beatles tours. But number 57 on my left-hand side is where the Beatles all lived together. The only time they all lived
57,
together.
huh?
Yeah. That's the end of 63. I can't go left there.
Beatles are everywhere, even they're from Liverpool, you know.
Yeah. Right.
All the houses in, they say if you come drunk, it's difficult to find if it's not number outside.
Well, yeah, some places go back even further. They didn't have numbering. They had, I'll try to find the street as an example, but you above the door was a different window pattern, and you identified which house you wanted with a different window pattern. Now, can I get to Grosvenor Square this way? I don't think I can. I've messed up there. Fire the guide. He's messed up. I'm just trying to get to Grosvenor Square a different way. Yeah, so we're in Mayfair, part of London called Mayfair. And the land around, no, it's all closed up there. Let's go this way. Well, very quickly, Hyde Park is ahead of us. This section of Hyde Park, the northeastern corner of Hyde Park, on a Sunday you have what is called Speaker's Corner. You can come down here and talk about anything you want. It's mostly people talking about politics and religion, the usual things.
They try to convince one each other about some issue, yeah?
Pretty much, yeah. You can come down, they can talk about anything you want, and generally speaking, you can talk about anything you want. I mean, historically, I think it was anything blasphemous was not allowed, but yeah. But a lot of the people come along here just to heckle. That's one of the things to do along here is heckle. That's on a Sunday. And then Park Lane, which is we're just about to turn on to Park Lane. This is the most expensive street on the Monopoly board, and the London version of Monopoly. And you can see there's like an Aston Martin showroom as well here. So and there's a few high-end hotels which we'll deal with, but the Grosvenor House Hotel, the main Hilton Hotel, the Dorchester Hotel are all along here. So going back to this area called Mayfair, the land around here is owned by the Grosvenor family, spelt Grosvenor, pronounced Grosvenor. They acquired the land in the early 1700s. Originally it was a family called the Davis family who owned the land around here when all this was countryside. And typically if you were wealthy, you want to have sons that you can pass your land on to, your wealth onto. But historically, if you didn't have any sons but only daughters, you want to find a suitable husband for your daughter, and then your son-in-law sort of inherits your land. That was the case with the land around here. The Davis family only had daughters, and they found a nice wealthy family in the north of England near a place called Chester, called the Grosvenors. They married into the family and acquired this land through marriage, and they haven't looked back since. So we've got the Grosvenor family here. We're coming into Grosvenor Square. The building on my right is going to be a new hotel, but was the US Embassy. And the US Embassy on my right-hand side was designed by an architect called Eero Saarinen. I think he was Finnish-born, an American architect who did the Arch at St. Louis, TWA Terminal at JFK Airport. But they also call this Little America because of a lot of US connections. Difficult to see, but over my left shoulder there's a plaque on the wall telling us that this was Eisenhower's headquarters during the Second World War, Supreme Allied Commander. There was another place called Norfolk House which has been demolished, but they were here. There's also in Grosvenor Square, difficult to see, but at 1 o'clock tourists can just see a statue of Franklin D. Roosevelt. That was unveiled by his widow Eleanor, who actually lived in London for a little while. There was also, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the statues, and the US Embassy have moved out of here. They've moved to the other side of the River Thames, a place called Battersea. Because to be honest, the building behind me, built in the early 60s, was not fit for purpose in the 21st century, and particularly after 9/11. Security was another big issue, so they moved to a purpose-built embassy elsewhere. But there was a statue of Ronald Reagan in front of the embassy, Eisenhower. There's also it's difficult to see with the sunshine, but there's a memorial to the Eagle Squadrons in the park. Difficult to see. I know where I'm looking, but it's difficult to see. The Eagle Squadrons were part of the Royal Air Force, but mostly pilots from Canada and America. So rather than flying on behalf of the US Army Air Force. So there's a memorial to them, and then also at 2 o'clock to us, what looks like the park keeper's little hut. That's a memorial to the victims of 9/11. It mostly lists the British victims. Obviously, there's a memorial to everybody that alas lost their lives in that attack, but it's mostly named in the British victims. And then the other US connection with this square is number 9. There's a little plaque on the wall. Number 9 tells us that John Adams lived here. Mm-hmm. So I've mentioned some fine statesmen, but some other fine people that lived along this street. A little plaque on the wall to the Bee Gees. A little green plaque on the wall at 1 o'clock to me tells us that the Bee Gees lived here. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that's where they wrote, I don't know, Night Fever and... there's another fairly exclusive hotel at 1 o'clock to us, the red brick building with the nice flags flying. This is Claridge's Hotel.
I stay here twice.
Other famous people that stayed here include Taylor Swift. When she first came to London, this is where she stayed. I know that for a fact because I'm the one that brought her here. And they came on a little holiday, her family. This was long before she was famous. The Swift family came on a holiday here. It was their guide. So again, it's all Mayfair. So the land is still owned by the Grosvenor family. If you want to come and live here, you typically buy a lease on the building. The leases are typically 99 years. Not that you're likely to survive a whole 99 years of a lease. New traffic rules. We have to allow people to cross the road. If they're obviously waiting to cross the road, we have to let them cross the road. That literally came into force recently. A couple more plaques on walls. There's George Frederick Handel, German-born composer, lived at, well, there you go. It used to be a store, but now you can see the Handel and Hendrix in London. A little plaque on the wall. George Frederick Handel did Messiah, among other things. And also Jimi Hendrix lived what is now N Peel with the red door. A little plaque on the wall to Jimi Hendrix. He lived here. American by birth from Washington State, but discovered by, what was her name? It was a girlfriend of Keith Richards that saw Jimi Hendrix in New York and said, go and get this guy, bring him over to England. So he made his name here in London. This is Bond Street. Bond Street is all fairly exclusive shopping. A few familiar names to some of you.
Yeah, and New Bond Street also the same.
Yeah.
Many shops, they are keeping the door closed, and if they look at you and scanning you, how you are dressed and everything, they open the door by remote.
Yeah, so exclusive shopping along here. Apparently, the most expensive up there with Ginza in Tokyo and Fifth Avenue shopping. It's up there as the most
they have
expensive
customers because there's a lot of Russian and Arabic people living in London. And
yeah, and I know the stores generally open at 10 o'clock. It's 11:15 now. There's a few people milling around, but I say it's... Right, where should we go next? Let us go... I promise I will shut up about the Beatles after one more thing. Since it's topical, I'll just show you one more Beatles thing. If I turn right here...
Okay.
I'm not going to turn right here, but there's a plaque on the wall, basically where the Queen was born in 1926. Let's say the house is long gone, but the street was where the Queen was born. A few more stores along here. There's a big queue for some store there. I don't know who it is, what it is. Actually, I say I don't do shopping. Why are all these people queuing for? What are they queuing for? I don't know.
I think some
the bathing
reduction, the discounts on some clothes.
Yeah.
Maybe the last opportunity to buy something cheap,
This is Savile Row. Savile Row, famous for a couple of things. Gentlemen's tailoring. Gentlemen's suits. Now, there was, up until recently, Catherine Sargent, the first lady tailor, was down here, but she seems to have gone. And another thing that Savile Row is famous for, number 7 Savile Row, is the address of a fictitious character called Phileas Fogg, created by Jules Verne, who went around the world in 80 days. The BBC have done a dramatisation of that fairly recently. starring David Tennant as Phileas Fogg. But the other thing that Savile Row was famous for, number 3 Savile Row, which says Abercrombie and Fitch on my left-hand side, this was the Beatles' Apple Corporation headquarters. So I talked about Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, passing away in August 1967. The Beatles set up the Apple Corporation, which included, all these companies like the film company, the electronics company, the music, but it was all administered from this building here. And I'm not sure about copyright, but I've got a few little clips here.
If it's music, it's copyright, and they will.
There's a couple of clips here of the Beatles turning up to the building here. The common thread throughout all these companies, money just hemorrhaged out the Beatles' bank accounts, and even here at the offices, there's stories of people stealing the top of the range typewriters from the office, and people stealing tape recorders and all sorts of things here. The drinks bill, you walked in the door, apparently a drink was thrust into your hand. The drinks bill was £100 a week, and similarly people coming in off the street ringing their relations in New Zealand. So money just coming out of the bank accounts here. And then there's a clip of that's what we're looking at here. So I'll turn the sound down in terms of music copyright, but I'm not sure if this film is copyright also. This is from the Beatles story, but there's Paul turning up to the building, and now it's
paparazzi,
it's all very topical at the moment because Disney Channel have done. The Beatles' last time they performed live was Candlestick Park, August 1966. Then they said, right, we're not touring anymore. What was the point? I mean, you couldn't really hear them. They couldn't hear themselves play. There's a nice story, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But you watch something like the Beatles at Shea Stadium. There's all these fans screaming, and they couldn't hear themselves on stage. I think 50 watts was the biggest amp they had back then. They could barely hear themselves. And there's a story that they've done a gig, and after the gig, Ringo says, "Hard Day's Night went well tonight, lads, didn't it?" And they said, "We didn't play Hard Day's Night." Whatever the truth, they got fed up with all the touring, so then they went in the studios. But then late '68, they've just done the White Album. Paul had the idea of doing a one-off live show, recording the rehearsals, and then doing this one-off live gig, do it as a TV special. And the others weren't that keen on it, really. But in early '69, they started filming this in Twickenham Studios, which was west of London. And it wasn't a very happy environment, according to what was released as Let It Be. Of course, the latest documentary on Disney Channel has proved that it wasn't all miserable sessions. But then George left the Beatles halfway through this recording session, and anyway, the rest of the lads found George and said, "Let's finish this project." And George said, "I'm not going back to Twickenham. Let's go here," because here in the basement they were making a studio of their own. And the man behind the studio project was Alex Mardas, who apparently didn't know what it was doing. If you're going to make a recording studio, you need to soundproof the building, which he didn't do. There was no communication apparently between the recording room and the mixing room. So another project where money was just wasted. But there's a little clip here of them in the basement here. I won't play the music for copyright purposes. But that's them in the basement of the building here. The whole idea of this project was to do a one-off live show, and I haven't seen the documentary yet, but it might reveal a bit more information. But from my understanding, they were due to play the Roundhouse in North London. The date had passed, they weren't quite ready, and then the director, Lindsay Hogg, said, "Let's go up on the roof of the building." That's debatable whether he said it or not. But anyway, whoever it was, they went up on the roof of the building, and on January 30th, 1969, the Beatles went up on top of the roof of the building to perform keeps being described as their last concert. I don't like using the word concert because it wasn't really a concert. It was just, another recording session to just, without an audience apart from, a couple of the members of the family. But this was lunchtime, and a friend of mine who used to work around the corner, he said he was there that day, and he said it was really loud. But when you look at the videos for all this, there's people walking along the streets around here, and they're looking up. But there's no point in looking up because you can't see anything. And then the police were called. I saw the little clip there. The police arriving, and they shut them down after 40 minutes. And John Lennon famously said, when they finished Get Back, John Lennon famously said, "On behalf of the group and ourselves, we'd like to thank you and hope we pass the audition." And with that, was the last time the Beatles played live together in public, in inverted commas. Of course, they then went to the studio again to record what was Abbey Road. So on the roof of this building, January 30th, 1969, so 52 years ago, a couple of days ago.
Time is passing.
Right, I promise I won't do any more Beatles, I promise. Again, this is all Mayfair, all the stores around here, the Royal Academy. This building on my left-hand side is home to the Royal Academy of Arts. So there's a gallery there. There's also home to various other institutions as well. The building is known as Burlington House, built in the early 18th century by a family called the Boyle family. They were given the title Earls of Burlington. And then a little sort of shopping arcade on my left-hand side is called the Burlington Arcade. If you look down that little street, that little shopping arcade there claims to be the world's first shopping mall. Claims to be. But some exclusive stores along there. And then back onto Bond Street, so there's a few more famous names as we drive down here, including Tiffany. Oh. Right, let's go and see Buckingham Palace. We'll get out of the car and we're going to walk around Buckingham Palace. Unless you want to drive by Buckingham Palace. There's much to say about Buckingham Palace. Shall we get out and walk? I think we'll get out and walk. Have to park the car and walk.
Yeah.
So back on Piccadilly, as I say, the name Piccadilly, strange name, takes its name from a Piccadilly type of collar, fashionable in the 16th century. This is the front of the Royal Academy. It's also home to other institutions, including the Zoological Society, the Linnean Society, and it was within this building that Alfred Wallace and I've forgotten the other guy's name, but basically the theory of evolution was spoken about there. Darwin didn't turn up that day, but Wallace was doing his own research and had his own theory of evolution. But the first sort of mention of the public mention of it was in the Linnean Society there. So Piccadilly's the street. There are a few stores along here, but it's not really a shopping street like Bond Street or Oxford Street. One of the main bookstores in London is Waterstones to my right-hand side. Used to be a department store called Simpson's, and Simpson's department store was the inspiration for a comedy show in the 1970s called Are You Being Served? One of the writers used to work here, so some of the people he worked with, he based the characters on that. But this is one of the main bookstores in London. Any book signings typically here, so I can't remember which. I think it was the third Harry Potter book, Prisoner of Azkaban. J.K. Rowling at midnight was here and signing books. So book signings are here. This comes into Piccadilly Circus. So if you've ever been to Rome, Circus Maximus was for Roman chariot racing, so like a circle. And so circus in this case is basically a circle. It was a circular junction, but as traffic management has changed over the decades, So it's no longer a circle, but it's called Piccadilly Circus, and it's the heart of London. You've got shopping on Regent Street over my left shoulder, most of your theatres on Shaftesbury Avenue to my left-hand side, and all the tacky stuff is around here. So there's yet another Hard Rock Cafe on my right-hand side. Five Guys, McDonald's, Pizza, KFC. Actually, KFC is gone and been replaced by Shake Shack. So a bit like Times Square to New York. I don't know if there's an equivalent in Romania.
American town, like Chinatown, you know, everything belongs to Americans are here around.
Yeah, but we avoid this area. And there's even M&M's World. I used to work for M&M's, but I got fired because I threw away all the W's.
Yeah?
Yeah. Another terrible joke you can expect on my tour. Ahead of us is Leicester Square, and all your movie premieres, the vast majority of movie premieres are in the Odeon Leicester Square. There's Lego store, McDonald's, yeah, you get the idea. Most Londoners avoid this area, unless we really have to go to the theatre or whatever, but we generally avoid this area. Yes, let's go this way. Oh, I've got to let you cross now, haven't I? That's the rule. I have to let you cross.
Then your rule obliges us to be polite, yeah?
Yeah, ordinarily I just drive, but now I've got to... Apparently you want to let you cross. This is the back of the National Gallery. We'll see the front of the National Gallery in a second. So National Gallery approaching 200 years old, and I think it was Angerstein was the main benefactor of it. Free to go in, National Gallery. And there's also the National Portrait Gallery, which is actually, I think it's going through refurbishment at the moment. They're free to go in. You can spend a week in the National Gallery. Collection of European art from the, from 1200s to the modern day. The usual suspects are in there. Your Raphaels, your Donatellos, the other Ninja Turtles are also in there. And
Charing Cross.
Theatres, yeah, this is Charing Cross Road, synonymous. There's a few more theatres along here, also famous for second-hand books and maps. And then we're coming into Trafalgar Square. So Trafalgar Square, built to commemorate the Battle of Trafalgar 1805. Go back to the Napoleonic Wars, say French Emperor Napoleon, big ambition of conquering Europe, largely by 1805. He conquered most of Europe. Next on his list was this country. He's got about 100,000 troops lined up on the north coast of France. He's ready to invade this country, but he needs the support of his navy, and the French were allied with the Spanish, so a combined French-Spanish fleet of some 33 ships against the Royal Navy's 27 ships. The Royal Navy were blockading the French and Spanish ships up along the coast of Spain and Portugal, and when the French and Spanish ships leave port, they engage with the Royal Navy off the coast of Spain, near Gibraltar, a place called Cape Trafalgar, and that's where the battle took place in October 1805. Ultimately, although the Royal Navy was outnumbered, we defeat the French and Spanish fleet without the loss of a single ship. It's important because it thwarts Napoleon's invasion plan of this country, but you know, the other major naval power in those days was the French, and we pretty much wiped out the French Navy. Which gave way for us Brits to go off and rule the world and do what we did with the world in the 19th century. So this square was built to commemorate that battle. The commander of the Royal Navy at the time was Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. He was mortally wounded at the battle. He stands on top of this big giant column that you see here. But this square is our party square. If there's a party to be had in London, we have it here. So typically New Year's Eve celebrations are held here, although they've tended to gravitate towards the London Eye over the years. Chinese New Year's just had that. They did have some events going on earlier this week here. And then St. Patrick's Day will probably be the next big thing to happen here. Pride is here also. So that's our party square. And traditionally, protest rallies are held at Trafalgar Square. This is called Admiralty Arch, built in the early 20th century. It's been converted to a hotel, but the Admiralty was in charge of... Oh, great. The Admiralty was in charge of the Navy and all those expeditions around the world. So there's a statue of James Cook, who was credited with finding Australia. They've closed this road off. They've got to go another route.
They used to close it on Saturday for people to walk, or it's a special...
I'm thinking it could be that the filming could be going on. There's a big production company. They certainly close it on a Sunday to traffic. Gives us a chance to look at the Admiralty again. I'd say up until fairly recently, this was government offices, but it's being converted to a new hotel. But the red brick building on the right is all part of the Admiralty. But then the Admiralty, they were in charge of the Royal Navy, but then in the 1950s, what was known as the War Office and the Admiralty and the Air Ministry all became the Ministry of Defence. So they still call the building the Admiralty, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the Royal Navy in there anymore. We also get another view of Trafalgar Square. And on the north side of Trafalgar Square, again, is the front entrance, the main entrance to the National Gallery with the nice portico and little dome. And then the church at 12 o'clock to us is St Martin's in the Field. This one dates from the early 1700s, but the very first St Martin's in the Field is 13th century, and it was in the field. This again was all countryside. Famous people that were buried in St Martin's in the Field include Robert Boyle, as in Boyle's Law, gaseous laws. Nell Gwynn, who was a famous actress of the 17th century, but more famous for being a lover of the monarch at the time, Charles II. And Thomas Chippendale, who made lots of furniture. They were interred in that church. And then Canadian High Commission is on my right hand side, hence the Canadian flags. High Commission, same as an embassy. The United Kingdom is part of a 53 nations in the Commonwealth, Commonwealth being the old empire, but all the nations in the Commonwealth, like Canada, Australia, India, they have high commissions and high commissioners rather than an embassy and an ambassador. It's the same thing. And the monarch is still head of state in, it's just been reduced actually. So the Queen, the monarch of the United Kingdom, is also monarch in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, but we've just lost, was it Bermuda, Barbados? I've forgotten which one it was, just recently. So it's just reduced it. I mean, it's still part of the Commonwealth, but... So this is Pall Mall, and along here you're going to find many gentlemen's clubs, not that sort of club. We're talking private members' clubs here in the heart of London. Institution of Directors immediately on my left-hand side. There's some filming going on here. The Athenaeum Club is on the corner of the beigey colour building on my left-hand side. That was mostly writers. And then you've got the Travellers Club with the nice flower boxes. It was in the Travellers Club that Phileas Fogg was given the challenge of going around the world in 80 days, and the Reform Club. So lots of these clubs, they have their various themes around them. So the and the members had certain common threads. So the Athenaeum Club was mostly writers. The ahead of us with the blue flag is the Royal Automobile Club, when motoring was a new fashion. So all these enthusiasts formed themselves into the club. We just passed the Reform Club, which was in the early 19th century when a whole bunch of people wanted to reform how elections worked and how Parliament worked. So lots of these clubs, and they all started life as coffee shops. Now I've got to find somewhere to park first. Now there's a space there, but can I get my van in there? I can. Let's let this guy. Right, that'll do for the moment. We're going to get out and walk to Buckingham Palace because it looks like the. You see all of that? They could have driven. Is there a big gap there? Oh, that's okay. Right, what do I need? I need that. I need my bag. That's a new way of opening the door. I need my bag. got to park. So they've got to pay for parking. There's a app now you use to park. So what you have here is you download the app. You've got a location number, which or it automatically picks up where you are. So 8915 is the location number. That's where I want to park. And then, yes, I want to park there. That's the car I want to park. How long do you want to park? Well, not going to be an hour, but I'll put an hour anyway. And it tells you how much it's going to be. It has my credit card details. And then I just put in the 3-digit code. Pay. Done. Okay, let's go and see the Queen. So yes,
They're waiting for us, yeah?
Oh, yes. So Pall Mall is interesting name. It takes its name from a game which was very fashionable in the 17th century. It was called, similar to croquet, called, I don't know, the Italian palloi maglio or something, hammer and mallet and ball. That's where the name comes from, and they used to play this game around here, and so the name Pall Mall comes from a game similar to croquet. But I say all these clubs around here. This is the Oxford and Cambridge Club, so I'm not sure what the requirements are. I think you certainly had to have been a graduate of Oxford University or Cambridge University, at least. I'm not sure if there's any specific requirements other than that. And you can get a drink in there, something to eat. Some of the clubs have rooms you can rent out, which in some ways might be a bit cheaper than a hotel room in London. The membership is quite exclusive. It's not expensive, that expensive, it's just difficult to get into some of these clubs.
Somebody have to recommend you, no, to be member.
Absolutely,
it's not enough to pay.
Absolutely, yeah. And then this area is called St. James. So there's a few buildings of note. Behind the doors here it says Marlborough House, the Commonwealth headquarters. So, talks about the Commonwealth being these 53 nations. When we get round the front, we'll see the flags of the 53 nations. It's like I suppose like the United Nations. And then the brick building ahead of us, occupying the whole block, is St. James's Palace. St. James's Palace started life as a hunting lodge. I'm just going to do my lace up. I can still do that, not bad. Started life as a hunting lodge in the 16th century. I say all of the land around here was all hunting ground, hunting deer or boar, and you needed to keep all the hunting equipment, all the dogs, etc. So it started life as a hunting lodge, a little bit away from the river. I say most of your palaces were on the river. So the King Henry VIII would have been living at Whitehall Palace, which is just about, half a mile from here. And then it becomes the main palace. I say there are lots of palaces in what is now the metropolis of London. There's lots of palaces. There's Richmond Palace, Greenwich Palace, Eltham Palace. And successive kings and queens had their favourite palaces. So some of these palaces fell into disuse. But this became one of the main palaces, particularly in the 17th century. And it was the main palace until they built Buckingham Palace in the 1830s, 1840s. And so the last monarch to live at St. James's Palace here was King William IV, who passes away in 1837. The next monarch was Queen Victoria, who then moves into the not quite finished Buckingham Palace at the time. There is, can't see it from here, but there's a chapel inside St. James's Palace, which has hosted a lot of royal weddings. So, the royal weddings we see today are, typically the big public events. They were never these big public events. Most of these royal marriages in history, were private events. And Queen Victoria marries Prince Albert here. King George V marries Queen Mary here. So really, they've only been these big public events for the last, 100 years or so. And then baptisms are generally not a public event, but certainly Prince George, so William and Kate's eldest, baptism of him was held at the chapel inside St James's Palace. Still is used as a royal residence. If my information is up to date, Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter, lives here, and I think Princess Alexandra, Queen's cousin, I think she's still living here as well. Is the wind okay with the camera?
It's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I have some protection, but it's not so strong wind.
And then we've got St James's Park to my left-hand side. So we're going to see Green Park again shortly. Like I say, all of this was just all hunting ground years ago. St James's Park itself first gets landscaped in the early 1600s, re-landscaped in the early 19th century when they built Buckingham Palace. And then another royal residence immediately on my right-hand side, the white building, that's called Clarence House, built for the Duke of Clarence, who eventually becomes King William IV, built in the early 19th century. Still is used as a royal residence, and the present occupier of Clarence House is the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and his second wife, Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla. This is where they live, and of course this is where Harry, and they moved in. Well, the last occupant before Charles moved in was the Queen's mother, who passed away in 2002, aged 101, and then after a bit of refurbishment, Charles moved in, so he's been here for 20 years now, or coming up to 20 years. And of course, William and Harry, they also lived here before they eventually fly the nest. And then the next building, which is probably where all the filming is taking place, the honey colour stone building, is called Lancaster House, originally called York House, residence for the Duke of York. Duke of York is a title given to the second son of the monarch. So in this case, it was King George III's second son. I think it was built for him. So it was used as a royal residence, and it was privately owned. I think it was the Lever family who made their fortune in soap. They moved into the house, and now it's used for receptions, maybe international meetings. So for example, if there's going to be a top-level international meeting about the future of, Afghanistan, this is the sort of place where they would hold it. But it's also used for filming, which looks like there's a whole bunch of cameras and lights there at the moment that often doubles up as Buckingham Palace in various movies. So for example, in Downton Abbey, it was used as Buckingham Palace in Downton Abbey. It was used as Buckingham Palace in National Treasure #2, and so I'm not sure what they're filming. We can ask and see what they are filming. When I walked past here the other day, they didn't tell me. They said a drama, but
for sure no cowboy movie.
So yeah, the Bridgerton was quite popular. Not that I saw it. Downton Abbey has just finished its second movie, but yeah, that's the sort of thing that would be filmed here. So the road that we didn't quite drive along, it's called the Mall, or the Mall, however you want to pronounce it. And then ahead of us is Buckingham Palace. Let's go and have a look. This junction ahead of us is all laid out. Actually, one of the advantages with all the roads closed is we can stand in the middle of the road.
Yeah, one of the advantages.
Yeah, so Queen Victoria, she was monarch from 1837 to 1901. So just shy of 63 years she was the monarch. And when she died in 1901, the junction was all laid out. So there she is ahead of us under the gilded figure of Victory. And then other countries contributed towards this memorial. So for example, the nice gold gilded gates to my right hand side, that's the Canadian contribution to the Victoria Monument. And then we just walked through the West Africa and South Africa gates. Just disappearing over to my left hand side is the Australian gates. And then ahead of us, the street continues called Constitution Hill. Just see the archway, that's the Wellington Arch that we saw earlier on. So Buckingham Palace, who lives here in Buckingham Palace?
The Queen, yeah?
Queen. Question, is she home today is the first question.
I understand it's some sign, I forget which sign, but I understand it's one sign, some flag or something, huh?
Yep, that's right, it's the flag. So at the moment, you can see in the middle of the building, the Union flag is flying. So Union flag is flying, is the Queen home or not? No. If she is home, you'll see a flag called the Royal Standard, which I will show you. A picture of the Royal Standard. Generally speaking, Monday to Friday, the Queen is here.
Now sharing day off, yeah? She don't work Saturday and Sunday, yeah?
Exactly, it's a tough job being a monarch. Especially when you're 96 this year. Let's quickly find the Royal Standard. Let's get away from the glare. Okay. Okay, let's have a quick look. This is the flag that flies if the Queen is home. It's called the Royal Standard. Royal Standard. 3 lines top left, 3 lines bottom right, harp bottom left, single red line top right. United Kingdom, clarified United Kingdom. England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is United Kingdom. England is represented by the 3 lions. Soccer fans amongst you, cricket fans amongst you, 3 lions on the shirt. Single red lion, Scotland, and then the harp for Ireland. There used to be a pint of Guinness, but they changed it for Ireland. So that's the Union flag that flies when the Queen's in residence. Union flag flying today, so where is the Queen today? Well, usually weekends she's at Windsor Castle. Windsor is just west of London, near Heathrow Airport. Weekends at Windsor. When she's on official duty in Scotland, that is the Palace of Holyrood House. Holyrood House is in the city of Edinburgh. And typically for a week in July, she goes up to Scotland, keeps an eye on the Scots, make sure they behave themselves. And then for August and September, she goes to a place called Balmoral. Balmoral is about a 50,000 acre estate up in the Highlands of Scotland, and that's where she spends her summer break. And then for a winter break, she goes to a place called Sandringham. Sandringham, slightly smaller, around about 40,000 acres. That is on the east coast of England. And she's typically there for about 5 weeks over Christmas and New Year, but because of certain virus going around the world, she didn't go to Sandringham. She stayed at Windsor at Christmas, but I think about last week she went to Sandringham. So she's at Sandringham at the moment, but ordinarily she'd be at Windsor at the moment. So Buckingham Palace itself started life as a home for the Dukes of Buckingham. So the United Kingdom, I mean, go back to my map of London. United Kingdom is divided up into counties. So there's London, but you've got the county of Surrey to the west, county of Berkshire to the west, and the county of Buckinghamshire to the northwest. And historically, you go back in time, I'm the monarch, you do good service to me, I'm going to give you a big chunk of land, I'll give you Buckinghamshire, and I'll give you a title Duke of Buckingham. So, yeah, up until the early 1700s, the Dukes of Buckingham had a house here, which was imaginatively called Buckingham House, and it looked like this. That was here. And then the royal family get hold of Buckingham House around about the middle of the 18th century, and then it was who was to become George IV that commissions Nash to build not quite what we see here, but behind this facade you've got the bulk of Buckingham Palace, which looked like that. The facade we're looking at the moment was done by Queen Victoria in the middle of the 19th century, then refaced with this white, what's called Portland stone, in the early 20th century. So there's over 700 rooms here, something like 770 rooms here. The Queen, we are told, occupies a suite of about 12 rooms. So just round the corner here on my right-hand side is a suite of about 12 rooms which the Queen has, so we're told. And then you can visit Buckingham Palace in August and September when the Queen is away on her summer break up in Balmoral.
But part of, I don't think everywhere.
Yeah, there's about a dozen or so rooms called the State Apartments. So there is a couple of other things open all year round. Just turn right here, you've got the Queen's Gallery. Monarchs have been collecting art for centuries. Can't display it all in one go. So a part of what's called the Royal Collection is on display at the Queen's Gallery. Small admission charge for that. And also what is open all year round is the Mews. So remember we mentioned the Mews, which is where you keep your horses and carriages.
Yeah.
Well, those horses and carriages used for ceremonial occasion are open to the public at the back of Buckingham Palace here. Let's just clarify a few things. So Queen Elizabeth II, tomorrow, February the 6th, is the anniversary of her succession to the throne. 70 years tomorrow, Platinum Jubilee.
Wow.
So she was born in 1926, and then she became Queen in February 52 on the passing of her father, who was King George
Big
VI.
celebration.
There will be in the summer because it's a bit cold in the winter. So there's it needs to be updated, the family tree, because there's a few more great grandchildren there. She was the eldest daughter of George VI. Because there was no boys, it just goes to the eldest daughter. And she has 4 children, Charles and Andrew Edward. They in turn have 2 children each, so the Queen's got 8 grandchildren. And I say this needs updating because there's a few more great grandchildren now. If the Queen dies today, the next monarch is Charles. There's no skipping of generations or anything. The Queen can't choose who could be the next monarch. It doesn't work that way. The Queen passes today, Charles is the next monarch. After Charles is then William, then George, then Charlotte, then Louis, then Harry. Then Harry has got 2 children now, Archie and Lilibet. Then after Lilibet, it'd go up to Prince Andrew, bypassing Princess Anne. Andrew's got 2 daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, who both in turn have got a child each. They were born this year. Then it will go to Prince Edward. He's got 2 young children, the Queen's youngest grandchildren. It goes on. Now, I did mention this when I said that after Harry's kids, it goes to Andrew bypassing Anne, but primogeniture, the boys take precedence over the girls. But when Kate was pregnant with George, they said, well, it's 21st century, age of equality. There's no place in this world for this primogeniture anymore. So they said, right, with effect from William and Kate's firstborn, the eldest child, irrespective of gender, will be the next monarch. Just so happens it was a boy, so the traditionalists are happy about that. But then Charlotte was born, then Louis was born. So historically, it would be George, then Louis, then Charlotte. But now that's changed, and so it's Charlotte's would be next in line. So that's the line of succession. What happens? Can the Queen quit? Yes, she can. The only monarch to have voluntarily quit, though, was the Queen's uncle. There's the Queen. Her father was George VI. George VI's eldest brother was Edward VIII. He was king in 1936. Now, he wasn't married when he became king, but he had a girlfriend called Wallis Simpson. Wallis Simpson was from the United States. She was a divorcee going through her second divorce, and the Privy Council are like a management team behind the royal family. They are there to make sure the royal family do what is correct. And what is not correct is marrying divorcees, because the monarch is head of the Church of England. The Church of England frowned upon divorce. The fact that the Church of England was set up by Henry VIII, who divorced twice, is regardless. But hey, it was an important issue back in the early 20th century. It was a big deal. They said to the monarch, you've got to give up this woman or give up being the king. So he said, you know what, I love this woman, I'm going to give up being the king. So he abdicated. He's the only monarch to have abdicated voluntarily. I mean, go back in history, monarchs overthrown. So the point I'm making, can the Queen quit? Yes, she can, but it's unlikely. What happens if the Queen gets too sick? Now, I mentioned this earlier on, that George III, 1760 to 1820, he, the last 10 years of his reign, he was sick. He really couldn't function. So his son, who eventually becomes George IV, acted as a regent from 1810 to 1820. So the point I'm making here, if the Queen gets too sick, I mean, she's 95, she's for all accounts in good health for 95 years old. If she gets too sick, then Charles would act as a regent. But we'll see what happens with that. So, tomorrow is the anniversary of the succession. 70 years.
Wow.
70 years as the monarch.
Platinum, you say, yeah?
Platinum, yeah.
Platinum.
So, and then similarly, so although the Queen became Queen in February 52, they had the coronation in the June of 53, thinking, right, we'll get the preparations, big day out, big celebration, still going through a bit of austerity after the Second World War. Turned out to be one of the wettest June days on record, but hey. So this summer, in the beginning of June, we've got a 4-day...
celebration.
Yeah, we've got a 4-day weekend. So there's the Thursday and the Friday are going to be national holidays of the second weekend in June. So there's going to be all sorts of events planned for that. There is all these big weddings and things like that. There's a balcony just above the archway there. That's where all the waving and kissing takes place.
Let's go close, yeah. To say hello to...
Yeah. Oh, sorry, folks. Get out your picture. So we've missed the guard change today. Guard change is Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday here. Every day in May and June. Lasts about an hour. To be honest, it's not that exciting. To be honest, the thing to see is first 10-15 minutes is the thing to see. That's when the sentries, the soldiers, march in with the bands playing. Around about 20 to 11 to 11 o'clock is what you want to see. But once the soldiers are standing in the parade ground ahead of us here, there's just two bunches of soldiers standing opposite each other. Not a lot happens, and to keep the crowd amused, the band play for the next half an hour to keep the crowd amused. And they could be playing anything from show tunes to ABBA medleys. Recently, when Meatloaf died a couple of weeks ago, they played Meatloaf songs. So the worst place to stand for the guard change is here, because there's not a lot happening. You need to be standing about 20 yards behind to see the bands marching in and out. That's all you need. There's another way you can tell if the Queen's home, apart from the flag. You can see 2 sentries at the moment, but 4 sentry boxes. So when the monarch is at home, apart from the flag, there's 4 sentries posted rather than the 2. The furry hat dudes that we're looking at are known as the foot guards, as opposed to the horse guards. We haven't seen the horse guards yet. It's time, actually. We should see the horse guards. Oh, actually, the horse guards should be coming this way. We should see the horse guards shortly, going back to their barracks. Horse guards change every day. We'll see that shortly. Anyway, these are called foot guards. This isn't their full-time job, looking pretty in a bearskin hat. They are regular army, infantry. And there are 5 regiments of these guys. The regiments are the Coldstream Guards, Grenadier Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, Welsh Guards. They all wear the bearskin hats, made out of Canadian black bears. People go, that's terrible, those poor bears. And the Canadians go, yeah, get rid of them. They're a nuisance. They all wear the red tunics. Now, because it's winter, they've got the grey overcoats on, so they've not got their red tunics on. But there's other ways you can tell which regiment they are. There's ways you can tell which regiment they're in. One of the ways you can tell which regiment they're in is there's a plume in the hat. And they've got a white plume as they turned around. From this distance, look like a white plume. Which tells us they are in the Grenadier Guards. Grenadier Guards. And if you decide you want to jump over the gate here, they might shout from their box, get back, but it'll be the armed police over there that are going to deal with you.
Do they work at night as well?
No. Good question. Are the soldiers here at night? No, they're not. They're usually gone by about when it's dusk. usually gone. I say the police would deal with them. So we should see the horse guards coming by. We should.
From which way?
Could be
This
coming
way,
this
huh?
way.
I mean, these days.
Should.
I have a friend who lives in Knightsbridge 199, and from his balcony I saw how they train there and how they move around, you know, on the park.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Oh, they should be coming. Well, we'll walk back this way anyway.
Anyway, yeah,
Don't think there's anything else to
we
talk
have
about.
to meet them on the way.
Yes.
Back.
Other questions about the royal family? How much does it all cost?
And who paid the bill?
Who pays for it? Okay, so you go back in time. There was a man called William the Conqueror, 1066, invades this country from Normandy, what is now in France. He says, right, I'm the king around here. This is all my land. If you're good to me, I'll give you some of the land. The land that the monarch retains is known as the Crown Estate, or the Crown Land. The coastline of the United Kingdom, for example, is all owned by the monarch. But a deal was done in the 18th century where the revenues from the Crown Land did not go to the monarch personally, but went to the government in exchange for an allowance, for want of a better description. The allowance in its present form is known as the Sovereign Grant. The Sovereign Grant, which was introduced a few years ago. And the Sovereign Grant is, generally speaking, 15% of the profits from the revenues of Crown Land go back to the monarch for the monarch to do his or her duty as head of state. So, for example, Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, they don't belong to the Queen personally. They are the official residence of the monarch. So some of that money from the Crown Estate will go towards the upkeep of Buckingham Palace, which is going through about a £400 million refurbishment at the moment.
Whoa.
Hasn't been done for about 100 years. In complete contrast, I'm redecorating my house at the moment, which is considerably less. It only has 3 rooms rather than 770 rooms. So the money. But I mentioned Balmoral and Sandringham, the Queen's other properties. They are the Queen's personal properties. Both of them were purchased by Queen Victoria back in the middle of the 19th century. That's the Queen's own personal property. If the Queen or her representatives are going to go off on a state visit to Romania, then that money pays for the state visits because she's representing us. If she wants to go to Romania for, I don't know, a wine tasting trip or skiing, then she has to pay for that herself. So I think they got a little bit extra the last few years because of the repair bill to Buckingham Palace. They've got a little bit extra than the 15% of the revenues from. And the Queen will have her own private finances also. We've already mentioned the houses, the properties that she has. She'll have her own art collection, for example. Although monarchs have been collecting art for centuries, a lot of the artwork is now held in a charity known as the Royal Collection. The artwork is held in trust, in the Queen's name, in trust for the nation, is the best way of describing it. She's, she can't go and sell a nice Rembrandt if she needs a new kitchen at, Balmoral, for example. But she'll have her own private collection, no doubt. She has her own, investments. Race horses, she likes some horse racing horses. Apparently even at the age of 95 she still goes horse riding around Windsor. So she's got race horses. She gets a few £1,000 in winnings from that every year. So they're okay. They don't. they've got their cash. But even if you take into consideration, the soldiers standing outside Buckingham Palace, they are regular army, so that's just going to be paid out of general taxation. But if you add everything up, it still works out at only about £1 per person per year. So it doesn't really cost that much in terms of. And as I say, there are people that want to see an end to the monarchy. There's a group called Republic. They're not a militant group or anything like that. The only time you ever hear from them is usually a royal wedding, when they say, we send out congratulations to William and Kate. We don't think we should be paying for it. But But there are people obviously completely obsessed. If we was to take a vote today, I mean, we could ultimately vote to abolish our monarchy. You know, if any of the political parties with the next manifesto, the next election, say we're going to do this with education, we're going to do this with housing, and we'll have a vote to abolish the monarchy, it wouldn't be a vote winner. It wouldn't be a vote winner. I mean, personally, you know, the advantages of a non-political head of state, I think, are there. It's quite good. Yeah, and of course, you know, all these people. There's lots of people obviously here today looking at Buckingham Palace. But that said, the French don't have a monarchy anymore. But still, people will go to Versailles Palace. There's all the various arguments, but I think ultimately it's here for the foreseeable. Okay, they're a bit late leaving, but here come the horse guards, which is handy because there's a bathroom here.
From the park?
Way in the distance, I can see them. They're going to be walking past this way, so we might as well wait for them to. Actually, we could cut across.
This was the second part of our tour. Will follow us and you will see the third one. Thank you.